All right. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is going to be a special episode in collaboration with Agile Nova Meetup. And I have a guest that I'm excited to have, Olivia Vick. She's a change maker and practitioner, and she will be talking about this topic that is very relevant, taking agency in your work. And I'm also joined by one of the participants here, Jim, who will be joining us in this podcast and participating and asking questions. And hopefully, you get some insights and benefits from this conversation. So, Olivia, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I know, Jim, we're kind of guinea pigging a little bit, but in the best of ways. So Salah had joined, a similar session over with the Seattle Code Crafters and thought this was a relevant topic for the group. So yeah, I'm excited because I think, Jim, you're gonna really offer a great sort of audience participation and input as we go along. Do you want to add anything else to your introduction before we go on, Jim?
Yeah, I'm an engineering manager. I work in cybersecurity. Been partaking in Agile for a number of years. And when I saw this advertised, it just seemed like a very interesting topic that could directly apply to my job.
Absolutely.
Absolutely welcome. So I want to start with Olivia as far as just a little bit of background. How did you get to this type of work? Maybe tell us a little bit what inspired you or brought you to this line of work.
So my background is actually in chemical engineering. It's where I got my, formal and training from. But what that really boils down to is process and process control. So I started my career out in General Electric, worked with more like hardware manufacturing process. I did do some systems and safety there, and I started realizing how much I appreciated the process of people, ways of working, and that's what got me interested in pivoting into software because of agile methodologies and stuff, which much harder to apply and adapt in a hardware environment. So I joined an enterprise content management, and really this topic sort of came about from realizing and watching colleagues, especially on the technical side, thinking about how much they hesitate or question or sort of wait.
Mm.
And I think that makes sense. A lot of technical people tend to be sort of risk averse, and I realize sort of a strength is being able to read through the gray areas, because there are gray areas and there are risk interpretations and things like that. So um, I named the presentation "Taking Agency in Your Work" prior to sort of the blow up of AI capabilities around agency. But I think it's important because it's a predecessor, and it's something that applies ubiquitously.
Yeah, I still think it's very relevant. I came through, I came through this video recently, and the speaker was talking about like three types of uh, people or how they handle things. And he said one of them is like the type of people that wait for things to happen. And then the second type of people is watch things happening. And then third type of people are making things happen. So I think taking agency is sort of aligned with that third one, like making things happen and not wait for permission and um, just wait and just taking action so that, and then that's how we learn. But just since Jim is with us here, what inspired you or brought you to this topic specifically?
Um, Working with other people, managing other people, talking through what drives them, what makes them want to not show up, but makes them more engaged. And it seems to be a very much a person-to-person conversation. There is no golden rule. There is no template that you can follow.
Hmm.
I I liked how you put things into three categories because I've always viewed it as people who are either cutting edge, they're behind the cutting edge, or they're the kind that sit back and wait for the cutting edge to iron itself out, and then they adopt, which just sounded very much in line with what you said.
So yeah, taking agency in your work. So let's explore that. And how do you define this like agency?
As we adapt, I was like, oh, like there's a flow obviously to a presentation, but for adapting for the podcast right here. So I'm going to describe agency through my primary example and sort of what I lead off as. And it's all story based, right? So for me, it was 18 months into my first software company. So I mentioned that transition into software, and I had that title of process engineer. It's basically like an internal consultant looking for where we can, make continuous improvements. And I connected with somebody else, and it turns out she was, a Six Sigma black belt practitioner. She was working with HR to sort of describe that next level of this process engineering role. And we connected, and she was like, "Hey, Olivia, do you want to join in with me with HR on defining that?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." There was no point in that process where I thought I should ask my manager, right? My joke is I did not pass go. I did not collect $200. I collected a whole lot more because in taking on that opportunity, I got clarity in my role. I got to connect with both HR and these other process engineers. But I also was then ahead of the game. So I had that insider knowledge of, oh, this is coming. And as soon as that next level of my role was defined, I knew it. I was able to create the evidence for it of, hey, I think I'm meeting this next role, and give it to my manager. And ultimately, I got an 18% raise, promoted to that next level. And it was all, initiated from me. It's my career, it's my life. And I actually I didn't know there were those three categories of people, right? So you talk to people and you learn, my one of my friends now was like, oh yeah, it took me a while to learn that I didn't need to wait on permission. That's my primary example of, in no way was I going around somebody's back or doing, I know what the organization's goals, I know what my manager wants from me. If I'm checking in to ask for permission, it's actually more of a burden on her. And so yeah, that's my primary example of agency. We want to break it down in real words. So we're going to hop around a little bit. But this is my slide for a definition, right? So I think agency has a couple of components to it. So when I talk about agency, and I think about who's involved and weighing the risks. So when we train AI agents, right, I think that's where the term is really focused on right now, and just timeline based. But what they really are they're autonomous, right? Autonomy is operating with, you have some set guidelines, and you're operating within those guidelines. So you can make decisions, but you have the guidelines, right? Agency is broader than that because humans are messier than that, and careers and the systems that we're operating in are far messier. And so the sort of requirements that you need to take that agency are accountability and advocacy. Accountability in the form of, when I take an action, I'm accountable for the results of that action. But that's both empowering. I think a lot of people view accountability as a downside, oh, I got to pay for this. But no, it's actually freedom, because, oh, if I'm taking accountability, I don't need to rely on those guidelines, right? I can use my judgment. That second aspect is that advocacy, because more often than not, you're either advocating for yourself or you're advocating for other people when you're taking these acts of agency. What do you think?
I think I like the word associated with agency, the words that you described here as far as accountability and advocacy. Because again, accountability in some ways, the way I look at it is you take responsibility for your action, or what, the action that you do. And then I agree that that's also freeing in terms of you're the one who is taking action, and if you need to do something, you don't have to seek permission. You can just advocate for that action. Or and maybe that's something that the another factor that we may get into at some point in this conversation is how the environment play a role in this dynamic, because I think that's also a big factor.
What about you, Jim?
So my immediate reaction upon reading that was a little bit more clarity. I talked about working with other people, and the independence, I think, is often confused with empowerment, when that's not really the case. And so that's kind of so that gives me the vocabulary, I think, to make those points a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too. One of the predecessors of this talk specifically came out of Melissa Boggs. She is a speaker and an agile coach, and she talks about being audacious, right? And like I had that reaction in terms of audacious. I was like, oh, like it takes a certain level of like confidence, or like I don't care, that sort of thing. But I still tested, she had a quiz like, what are you? And it was still audacious. And that's, it was one of those things where like, oh, but it's not that I'm self-centered in that, I'm owning it, but I'm also recognizing that like the impact on others in that, defining the role example, right? Like I'm not just defining it just so I can like make more money. I mean, that's great, sure. But no, I'm defining it for the rest of the practitioners, the rest of the, process engineers in that case at the business.
And I think maybe if we take it even to the micro level of agency, what's a good example to highlight this idea of agency?
Oh, I love the micro level because I think, again, we often think of it as big actions, right? So big results. My micro example is more in the form of advocacy. And so making the workplace that you are the place that you want to be. So I have an example where, I have a teammate who uses they, them pronouns, and my manager is maybe they're trying, maybe they're not trying hard enough, but either way, they're kind of missing the pronouns, right? And I know that person is getting tired of correcting. And when it's coming from the person themselves, it's putting it back on the marginalized community. So my active agency in that case, hey, I want to work in a workplace that supports this level of diversity. So my active agency is actually usually giving a nudge, like, hey, don't forget, like this is their pronouns. Or when I'm speaking about them, I'm being very, like explicit and making sure I'm using their pronouns more to make them both feel seen, but also not making them the only one who has to advocate for themselves in creating that workplace.
I have an example about like even in meetings, sometimes people wait to chime in or to talk. Like is even those like really small and micro level example, but it's sort of the like if you're everyone is waiting for others to chime in or to say something, and it seems to me that's even though that's a very small example, it requires agency and accountability because when you say something, you're basically advocating for your maybe idea or position or perspective, and and then you're encouraging others by showing up and saying something so you can help others also step up or contribute. The topic or the description is like waiting for permission. And
Mm.
that's the problem sometimes with, even at the meeting level, people are just waiting for others to say something. And I'm 99.9% confident that everyone has ideas that they could offer, but they just hold on to their ideas until someone else says something.
That's actually, spoiler alert, one of the things that I focus on up first when I talk about agency is that perceived barrier of permission. Awareness, right, helps to clarify when you're seeking permission and not. So I detail different types of permission, right? So in some cases it is, hey, I'm waiting until I have more authority. I'm not the person running the meeting, so I don't need to
Mhm.
like do anything about it. In other cases, I talk, my example of the micro is psychological safety, right? So I'm going to wait until I feel a little bit more comfortable. And sometimes, right, that's completely valid. And you absolutely like that permission that you're waiting on makes sense, right? Why do humans seek permission? It's to protect yourself, right? To minimize your perceived risk. Challenge is that we're always going to consider something as risky. We're not built as a system to say, yeah, let me take on more risk. And so we overestimate the severity of the risk in every situation. What if you do speak up? I mean, chances are you've put your foot into your mouth a couple times in your career. Let's think about how that really turned out. It's probably okay. Um, so that's actually, the bulk of what we talk about when I run this session with a wider group, are some of those perceived barriers of permission. So we think about obviously like waiting for explicit permission from somebody in authority. Maybe you're waiting until you yourself hold the specific leadership role. So like formal accountability. Some of the scarier or like really more challenging ones are like alignment. Like, oh, maybe I'll start playing with AI once the rules come out about how to play with AI. And it's like, well, hey, how can we, especially as agile practitioners, make it smaller, make it so that you have the bounds, you're still getting the outcomes, you're still experimenting, but no longer needing that barrier of permission. You're mitigating the risk.
I could chime in with a very similar example.
Yeah.
Work with a teammate, and he created a ticket with an idea. I don't think anybody read it. I had a very similar idea from a book I read. And as I was presenting it at a meeting with everybody's blessing, he was quite irate. And so I talked to him later, and we talked through the different approaches. And I told him I came up with the idea from reading a book. And then I called 3 other developers. And then I called, after I had their input and their buy-in, I called the manager and said, don't you think this would be a good idea? And this is how it would work. And here are the people that agree with it. Stunning success. And it was so cool walking this other developer through that, because he got to see, hey, this is how I can start to grow like that. This is how I start to, instead of sitting back and hoping somebody notices, that I can actually go out there and talk to people and advocate, hey, this is a good idea. Get that feedback and present it. I actually found it pretty rewarding. I like watching people grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking about that this sort of example that Jim just gave. It aligns with that definition that you just mentioned, like agencies, accountability, and advocacy, right? So it sounds like you advocated for the idea. You didn't just put it on a board. You went and advocated for the idea, talked to this person, the manager, the developers, the team, and you made something happen.
Well, and that's like I always think about like what are the prerequisites for me taking agency, right? And first and foremost is building those relationships. So in that example, right, like you had an existing relationship with those other developers. So it's not like you're coming and say like cold calling them to bring your idea to the table, and you're doing something in a way that's approaching it with curiosity, and relying on those. So those prerequisites for agency, it pulls back to like the independence, right? So I can't just take an active agency, go along. No,
Yeah.
like that's not agency at all. That's just self-centeredness. But if you think about, hey, I depend on these other people, I'm building my relationships, I have that network, move forward with it.
I was just gonna unpack that a little bit because you said prerequisites, and I'm curious, like what are some of the prerequisites? I heard relationship building is a big one, right? So you have some relationship or rapport at least established with the group before you advocate, or is there other prerequisites?
For me, I have 3. So besides relationships, I have meeting those expectations. So you are in the context of work, and obviously this translates outside, but in the context of work, you have a job description, right? Like you have responsibilities that you should be meeting, and if you are not meeting those, then taking acts of agency are that it's higher risk. Why should your manager let you go and do this idea to change something when you're not meeting your regular responsibilities, right? That prerequisite is interesting because maybe your active agency is actually having the conversation of like, hey, I have this work, but that's actually not what I want to be doing. My passion is over here. Depending on the context, that could be your active agency opening up, hey, what real roles or responsibilities are going to like work best for me and the organization. And then the third is understanding your constraints. So I know Jim, cybersecurity, I'm in the have a software product for cybersecurity right now, right? So there are going to be specific constraints, either legally, like security wise, or even in terms of ethics, right? So if you're in a healthcare industry and the changes that you are interested in could impact people's lives, right? Understanding what those constraints are, why they exist, is incredibly important for agency. What I think can unlock agency for people in those situations is we treat constraints as limiters. And put us in a box, but the research actually shows constraints breed creativity, right? It just means that it's a problem, a fun challenge, and you have a little bit more structure to operate in, which it can actually produce great results.
That's really a good thing to highlight, that constraints are basically things that it's almost like boundaries. You're still have a field you're playing in, but there are still boundaries. And that could help you navigate to how you can advocate or bring about some ideas that are out of the box, or not really traditional in a sense.
As she was talking through that, Olivia, it reminded me of the movie Apollo 13. Because I hadn't thought of constraints the way she expressed it as breeding ingenuity and creativity. But if you think of the movie Apollo 13, he had a very, very constricted number of objects that he could work with to try to achieve his goal. And he sat there all night, and it was a pretty ingenious solution. Like, you do this, this, and this with this duct tape to hold it all together. It was creative. It was pretty cool.
You might have seen this or heard of this challenge, the marshmallow challenge, where you can give a group of people, a couple of spaghetti noodles and a marshmallow and sort of thread and a tape, like so very limited supplies of things or constrained, like almost like ingredients, and the task is to build the highest structure with these things. And yeah, people manage to come up with ways that they never thought possible because of the constraints.
Yeah, I served in my safety and systems role. That's really where I noticed that opportunity. So safety or compliance oftentimes is viewed as like a barrier. Hey, how can we treat it? And usually, right, it's because that person is integrated into your team. It's actually like an interpersonal dynamic, ways of working more so than the actual requirements that you're operating towards. So bringing to that role, like, hey, I'm not going to be a barrier. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to find out how to do this with you. Here are our options, or how do we make this so that it's easier for you to understand?
So those are the prerequisites, and then we have the agency, the definition of agency, the accountability, and advocacy. And I really like the question that you paused in the description of this talk, is what if you could lead without waiting to be a leader or to be crowned as a leader? Because a lot of time people confuse like being a leader with having authority. A leader could be anyone who just take initiative and take an action. What have you seen in terms of examples of people who were able to make this shift of taking action, or not waiting for permission, or not waiting for to become a sort of a manager from a hierarchical standpoint or authoritative standpoint?
You asked me what have I seen, and I'm like, oh man, this is just my career in general, because leading people directly, right, like managing people, coaching or even mentoring, right, not that I don't enjoy it, but when I think about like where my interests lie in sort of technical and systems, like I don't want to be the person on the top. I want to be sort of the side enabler. I really enjoy that role. And so given that, the feedback that I've gotten multiple times in my career was actually, hey, I didn't realize like everything that you were doing until you presented on it, or whatever. And you're like, oh, wow, like those are huge unlocks. And it's like, yeah, I'm at the ground level. I'm making people's lives better. How often do we pop up and actually like communicate that? But what you'll see, so there's two types of authority in an organization. So there's informal authority. So that's those people who are socially, people respect them. They go to them for questions or advice or resources, but they don't necessarily have formal power, right? And then formal authority, obviously you have more influence on budget or control over the budget, over hiring, or decisions in terms of the workforce. So I've always fallen towards the latter, and sort of accidentally, right? It's hey, it might look like, hey, whenever I use a tool, I dive into it. Whenever I find cool things, I start posting on Slack, and then all of a sudden, people are like, oh yeah, Olivia is the person you go to if you want to figure out how to do X, Y, Z. And then where that then turns into sort of leadership, right? Because at that point you're just like, oh, this person knows a lot, or there's me, maybe that sort of thing. Where it turns into leadership is flipping it to empower others to do the same, right?
Mm.
So in some examples, it's, hey, that was really cool what you just did. Why don't you post it to the Slack? Or this looks really great. Let's set up a lunch and learn so that other people can share it. So it's amplifying those other voices. And that's how you become sort of that, like, leader with the informal.
That's it's almost like a progression of, awareness, self-awareness, and then you work on yourself and you build that agency for yourself, and then you help other build it for themselves. So it's kind of like that's sort of like the almost like a leadership ladder, if you will.
You may notice I don't have much hair up there, but if you did, you see how gray it was. Because my opinion of that has really changed through the years. Because when I was younger, I would have thought, and I did think, that it was the people that were exceptionally good and engineering managers, technology, that there were people very good with technology. And as I was in the field for, well over a decade, I really came to respect the people that actually had very good communication skills. And slowly I came to the belief that you had to be technically good enough and you had to have enough social skills, but what they call emotional intelligence, which is not a word I really, or a phrase I really liked like 5 or 6 years ago, but I've come to better understand. And I've always taken that as the ability, well, to advocate, to communicate, not only one-on-one. You've got to see things from somebody else's viewpoint,
Mhm.
right? But understand what drives them, right? That understand when I'm talking to this person, their approach is this. And I think that's just one of the best ways to become a leader, regardless of what your position is. That when you are good at understanding where somebody is coming from and you're able to communicate and you're able to introduce or clarify the technology, I mean, that is just a winning combination.
This is a great point. I'm actually thinking about emotional intelligence in this context because as you advocate, not everything you advocate will come to fruition, right? So you gotta be able to withstand this sort of almost like quote unquote maybe rejection of the ideas that you propose, and try to adapt or adjust. So Olivia, would love to hear your take on that.
Oh man. Uh, yeah, that's a topic that I spoke on that was also a predecessor that led directly into this, right? Because I worked with a phenomenal coach, Maridela Gonzalez, and now a friend. And we worked on a project together where it was that exact situation, right? So there's like this opportunity, like you've got this big old legacy product that is like on premise, everything like that, but they're building out cloud functionality over here. Hey, in my mind, I'm like, oh, we can really inject and start things off right with some agile ways of working, things like that, right? And so you start getting kind of tethered, right, to that idea. And I use the word tethered intentionally. There's a book from Michael A. Johnson called the Untethered Soul. I'm looking because it's right over here in my book stack. But essentially what it does, and it plays actually on Peter M. Senge's mental model, suspending your mental model. So, hey, you're going to have thoughts. We all have thoughts. We all have a brain. The brain is a tool, right? So it's actually the key is that like you stay in your awareness and detach, untether from your thoughts, because
Mm.
again, your thoughts are driven by this tool that we know can be faulty. And if we really want to achieve understanding somebody else's perspective or being open to how something actually could happen, you have to keep those things separate. Otherwise, you'll wind up in the situation that I was, and luckily I had a partner who was coaching me through it to help me learn sort of the skill. But I was like frustrated. I was like, hey, this
Mm.
is an opportunity here. They're not listening. They're not doing, we're presenting it. They say they want this. It's not happening. Um, and I just kept like I would tether to one thing and it's like, okay, we'll pivot, we'll do it this way, but I'm tethered to that thing now and that's not working. So it just ends up in frustration and it ends up in nobody's going to win from that. it comes down to those influencing skills that Jim is mentioning, being aware sort of what's happening in my brain, untethering from that, but understanding where the opportunities are. And you can't do that if you're tethered to your one way. You're not going to get a clear field view of where that's going. So that's sort of one of those mental mindsets that it's a continuous practice. It's not easy. We like humans right now in this point in time are more attached to like our identities and our sense of selves than like ever before. And it's affected us in many ways.
I'm going to steal this idea.
Yeah. Like I said, it was its own talk, its own, developed thing. So it's important. Yeah.
I like the word untethered because I think that's very relevant here because we do get attached to the ideas that we propose and it becomes part of who we are and I may have used the word rejection, quote unquote, of ideas, but it's not, I think a lot of times the story or the what we tell ourselves when the ideas that we propose get rejected or people object to them over and over again is like, okay, it becomes personal, right? And that's where it becomes exhausting and almost like you start to sort of give up or maybe wait, go back to that, like wait for permission or wait for something to happen. So maybe that takes us to the point of a couple of places that we can explore here. One is, how do you recover, stay in the game, basically, of taking action and not waiting for things to happen. And then the other place we can explore also is the idea of you have been proposing different things. Maybe you need to step back and look at the prerequisites, like you said earlier. Maybe the relationship with the person or the team or the group are not enough for us to advocate, create this sort of momentum. So I don't know. I'll leave it to you and maybe Jim to say, like, where do you want to go as far as the next path here?
I have so many thoughts, but what I'll synthesize or sort of focus on in this context. So Salah, to restate my understanding is like, hey, what happens when you start recognizing like I'm putting my ideas out there, I'm trying to take agency, I'm trying to do something, and it's not working, right? How do I figure out, or maybe I'm listening to this talk or I see something and I'm like, oh, that's what the situation is. I'm waiting on permission somewhere, right? So first and foremost is like awareness, right? So being aware of sort of the concept of permission, why we're waiting on it, that risk level. But then what it really goes into is influencing skills and like this two things. One, I call it inception, right? So Inception, the Christopher Nolan movie, great. The concept of like you have to plant something in somebody's brain. It has to be their idea. It's an actual psychological phenomenon called non-invented here syndrome. And again, it's because our brains are built for risk management. So if it's not their idea, then it's a psychological response. Oh, no.
Non-inventive what?
Not invented here syndrome.
Not invented.
Not invented here. So when my brain sees something coming at it from the outside world, and especially if it's not in my language or like the words that I would use for it, right? Like it says no, like this doesn't jive with, again, it's just how it's built. And I bring like that concept of inception up because you have to be willing to sort of wait a little bit, right? You have to be aware that you're going to have an idea and you might even propose it, a year ago, right? Or maybe you've been talking about it and nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden it clicks with somebody, right? And so you can either spend all of that time frustrated, especially if you're somebody like me who like gets excited or passionate about something. And then when I don't see the progress, like that goes into frustration really fast, right? Or you can accept. So hard to accept, but accepting on multiple levels. One, hey, I can accept that like I trust this idea or this hunch, this intuition, like what I've developed. I have a pretty good tool in my head, even with its faults. But you can also accept that like if people aren't ready for it, it's not going to work. I'm not going to like show right in a lot of, especially when you talk about personal agency, you're not necessarily putting on those big changes, which then have more like change management practices and that sort of thing built in. But I need to be able to accept that, like, I'm going to say something, the person is going to hear something entirely different, and I'm going to think they heard something entirely different. And that's just being humans, especially as we open it up to more diverse workplaces. So it has that benefit, but then it also, you have to accept that then there's going to be a longer translation layer, maybe a longer layer, wait time of people feeling open to that idea. And in those cases, like, you want to have the "I told you so" moment.
Yeah.
But that's all ego. That's all ego based, right? Like, so awareness of, hey, why do I actually want this to happen? Right? A lot of times, again, it's not actually just for you. A lot of times, especially in our space, we care about other people and we want to make things better for other people. And we either get attached to, this is the way to make it better to other people, or we stay opportunistic, accept our limitations, accept other people as they are, and trust that it's gonna get there. That doesn't mean you stop pushing. That doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means that when we do try or push, we have more reasonable expectations of us.
So I always like to give cultural references rather than people for fear. I've been on podcasts and talks on Substack. So I was thinking of the timing, and I was thinking of Michael Scott from The Office in the early seasons when they really stressed what a good salesman he was. And you didn't really see that often. But they took a client out one evening and he kept telling his boss, no, don't talk about selling yet. Don't talk about selling yet. And he just let the guy talk and let the guy talk. And finally, he was like complaining about something and the way the big companies dealt with him. And that's when Michael Scott was like, well, funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
Big sale.
Yeah.
That timing is key, I think.
Mm.
Getting people to the point where they can accept, here's a change.
It requires a lot of resilience, I think, because again, that's maybe that's something that as change agents or people who try to advocate for our ideas, I mean, I'm using change agent loosely here because anyone can who advocate for their ideas is advocating for a change, right? So people may or may not accept that change, and so as Olivia mentioned, that can be very hard. And then when they finally accept the idea that you proposed a year ago, are like, okay, oh wow, okay, I see, remember a year ago let me find the emails and so it is hard to accept that, okay, wow, now you're coming around to do this. And but yeah, there has to be some sort of an acceptance of, okay, the readiness, maybe that the idea wasn't, the time wasn't right for this particular idea. And we see this now with AI and sort of like all the companies sort of trying to push AI aggressively for the people to adopt the AI and different platforms, different tools. I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't. I'm just saying, like, the change and how people adopt these new things can vary, as we know from working in in this type of change or agile in general, any sort of culture change in general.
Yeah, I think my first step of agency is critical thinking, and critical thinking in and of itself is, again, at this cultural point, its own active agency, because we are in an environment where our systems are set up to not make us think. They want to feed you, oh, I have an algorithm, I'll feed you exactly what you want to see, when we know, hey, I actually need to make myself see these other things. And that's where it's both a agency in and of itself, and what you're talking about in terms of like change and adoption of tools, or kind of watching the world around us. It's very easy to get overwhelmed, and to sort of pull and go into like learned helplessness. Again, that's sort of what our
Mm-hmm.
systems are building towards. And critical thinking takes energy. It's uncomfortable because it's the growth mindset actually means that you're challenging yourself constantly. right? It's not just like, oh, I unlocked critical thinking. Here I go. Now everything's going to be easier. No, it's, hey, I have this skill and I need to continue using it. And every time I use it, it's going to have more effort than what the system is built for. You're going to start feeling like the person is like, oh, wait, can we slow down? Or can we think about this for a second or whatever? And that's me saying it. And I'm not somebody who likes to slow down. But in most cases, right, it's worth the check, worth the, hey, this is the fourth time I've gotten on my phone today. What am I actually seeing and what is this actually doing? It's worth the, hey, AI just spit something out to me. How do I double check it? Like, what are the cues that I'm looking for? And not buying in the specific storylines that you're fed, because we know that those are also interpretations. So they come with that.
Yeah, there was a lot to talk about in this topic because it sort of affects multiple things. And you mentioned learned helplessness and ideas of people after several attempts, maybe of advocating and trying maybe different things, they can go into that place where nothing will change, so why bother kind of mindset. So I think to try to give some ideas on how, what are some things that you could do to recover or continue to build this growth mindset, or the idea that okay, you can continue to advocate and be, I mean, maybe patient or maybe resilient, or having an outlet to have a conversation with like-minded people to continue that path of advocating for your ideas and not just waiting for permission.
I think that mechanism is going to look different for everybody. And maybe we could talk about, we could turn to the beginning where you talk about sort of those three categories of people. So this is a thought experiment. I'm not sure if it's going to come out and work out, but we've already established I'm in like the early adopter sort of like category of people, like go. And so for me, it's actually about slowing myself down, creating friction in my systems to remind myself of some of these core things. So, meditate for like just 10 minutes, even just like stop, pause, take a breath, and make sure that I'm putting the decisions and my work in the context of the greater scheme of like life, even, right? So, and that's that risk assessment. When we talk about permission and avoiding it, what's the actual risk, right? I think a lot of times we're like, oh my gosh, it'll damage my whole career. And you're like, will it though? And I will say the biggest mistakes in my career have not come out of taking agency, which is kind of interesting. So then you have sort of that middle group of people who are you said the waiters and the watchers, right? So we have the watchers is that middle group of people who are like, oh yeah, like, am I ready to like dip my toe in, go for it, right? So for somebody like them, it might be developing a system it depends on their goal, right? But in the scenario of like, hey, no, I really want to be able to influence more, it might be developing the skill of like, okay, when do I break the script? When do I engage? How do I engage sooner? There's it's essentially cognitive behavioral therapy. So run the experiment and start small, but keep running the experiment. So again, your brain is going to challenge you, and so you break it down. What's my hypothesis? Like, if I do this, I'm taking on some risk, or X, Y, Z. Do the thing. Hey, was my hypothesis correct? And that's how you sort of train your brain. Not that you're going all the time. For the and the waiters, right? So I'm waiting for everybody else. I often think of that as the Aaron Burr. If you're familiar with the Alexander Hamilton musical, it's wait for it. It's hey, I'm going to wait till everything settles. For that, is creating reminders of, hey, what do I have to lose? Right? What am I missing out on because I'm waiting? We talked about sowing the seeds and influence and how things take time. So one of my primary examples is like, you wait to ask for the promotion or ask for the raise or whatever until like budget planning comes up. Well, your manager or your leaders have already been in planning and decision making way before that. Or it's on their mind, or as they're having conversations to prepare for that. If they don't know, like, that's what you want, or that's what you're looking for, or that's what you need, then you've waited too long. And there are ways to do it that are not just like, give me more money. There are ways to go about it, especially critical thinking and doing some research and bringing that to the table that aren't quite as scary, I think, as we see. So creating some of those, reminders on that end.
Mm.
Jim, what do you think?
So before you went into that, that was very good. And I've really appreciated coming to this and getting these ideas that I can take and use. But the approach I was taking before that was the difficulty in having that skill set to advocate for something.
Mm.
And I was thinking of there's an old band called REM, and listening to the lead singer talk about how he became good. And it was, he started out and it's like a circle. And he talked about being at the top of the circle, you're a novice and you keep learning the craft. And when you're at the bottom, that's when you're really good. Now you go back up to the top, and that's when you are the master. And you find out how you don't know anything beyond that circle. And so you have to accept that you are the novice in some other way. And I've used this story. I've always thought of the Beatles and the Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell and how he explained how they became very good and very influential. Their first albums were great. They had trained for so long together.
Mm.
When they recorded those albums, they were exceptionally good. That's why they were hits. They weren't exceptionally influential until, oh my gosh, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And if you watch PBS, they have these Beatles specials and they're talking about how they made the album. And it was John Lennon that really made me think of this in all these different experiences, musical experience that he brought into like a day in the life. And he sat down and worked through it with Paul McCartney. Like, this is how we're going to do it to come up with this classic song. The amount of effort that it went into to get there, right? And then be able to, and once you have those tools, you have the experience, you're able to pull things in, and you probably learn this in Agile, right? That there's no one single thing to be good at, right? T-shaped people. So if anybody's not in technology, that's where you have a general knowledge of the whole process, but you're really good at one thing. And so being able to do that and have those skills to communicate it and to understand what people need to buy your idea, that's kind of where my mind was going, was that whole, how do you get to that level to be able to do that well? And there's a lot of failure. And that's kind of what spawned my whole thought process was you were kind of hinting at it without using the word failure, but there was a lot of failure before you're actually good at advocating for yourself, advocating for your ideas.
I don't like failure in general. It's usually just life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like the saying, you don't lose, you win or learn type of thing. So it's not failure if you learn from it, in my opinion. And that's what it seems like every experiment, as you mentioned earlier, experimenting with different things, taking small steps, every step, whether it worked or it didn't, it gives us a different path, or it like give us more clarity on where to go next. But I have to look up that video that I that categorized as like people, because it sounds like we build a whole framework about agency using this, like, watchers, waiters, watchers, and I don't know, maybe you can call the third category makers, because they make things happen. I don't know, maybe you can come up with a name. It's almost like the metaphor I'm thinking of is like in sports, people, watching a game, and then you have, those are sort of like the watchers, and then you have the players in the game. They are the actually things, people that are making things happen, and then maybe people substitute. They're waiting to be subbed in or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know. The metaphor doesn't hold very well, but I think there is, from what I heard from you, Olivia and Jim, is that you can shift, each of those categories towards agency. It's not like something that you have. It's something that you learn over time. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, I think like the end goal of agency is not, hey, I'm independent and I make my own decisions and I go, go, go every time. No, the end result is, in general, I've thought critically about it. first. And so either, you get the change or the outcome, and with a risk that's lower level,
Mm.
right? That's more realistic, that's more reflective of what the actual, real life risk is. And so the goal of agency is just as a skill in and of itself. And
Mm.
that level looks different for different people for their different risk tolerances and levels. So.
I found what you said, Salas, a little earlier about it reminded me of ego, the ego of the difference between failure and am I learning something from this experience, right? And to get beyond failure, you've got to get beyond your own ego. And how much, when you think of advocacy and you think of agency, how much of that is ego versus more than just yourself? And thinking of, you're influencing other people. It can't be about you all the time.
Yeah, I actually, so are you doing it for your sense of self and identity? Are you doing it to uphold values? That's sort of the breaking point, that I think, especially when it comes to advocacy, right? So if I am, if I'm speaking up for my coworker or reinforcing, their pronouns or something, if I return to that example, right? Am I doing it because like this is what I believe in, and I need to make sure that I'm taking action, otherwise I am not a good ally? I mean, like, that's all tied to me, right? That's not actually standing for the value of, hey, I appreciate inclusivity and making a safe space for other people. So, and I think if we've talked about untethering and kind of separating those, it all comes into play.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic because who other than yourself know this, right? I mean, I think it's hard to, maybe people might pick up on the whether this person is doing it for ego or for values, like Olivia mentioned. But again, like a lot of time, the ego is going to be impacted. Like if someone is proposing ideas and the ideas are not being adopted, over time that can sort of hurt the ego of anyone, right? And so the idea here is like, how do I recover from this? Because again, like, maybe I think that's a good way is, why am I advocating for this? Like, what is the purpose? Why is this important to me as a person? And that could sort of, that value can, that shift of value, that like focusing on value can help sustain that mindset, and not feel like, why bother, why continue to do this. I think that's what a lot of cultures that have waited, I'm talking even at the team level within companies, a lot of times I see teams just waiting to be told, here's what you need to do, and everybody's waiting for someone to do something. That's sort of like the invisible delays that happen that people may not see, because they're not really on a board. We put we put work on the board and we break it down to stories or whatever, or work items, and then we talk about it, we check in, we say what's happening, and everybody's saying like, we're working on this, we're working on that. But there is the underlying thing is like, people are waiting for someone to do something, right? Agents can permeate a lot of things within a company or a team, and by extension it affects also the morale. Like if people show up every day and they're waiting and they don't see progress, they don't have the sense of fulfillment, and accomplishment is decayed over time, and then it's like a vicious cycle, and then they continue to wait for something to happen, or they quit and find another place, to advocate for their ideas and be heard.
Well, that's, I think, we're really circling back around to that original sort of definition or clarity words that I use: accountability. So, in those situations, right? So, hey, my team isn't getting handed a lot of work, or we're waiting, or there's this bottleneck over here, or whatever. And again, waiting either, for somebody to give me work, so that's my permission level. There are consequences whether you take agency or not. So that's really what the accountability comes into, because it's like, hey, am I going to take accountability for an action that I took to, improve a process, or, like prepare, or maybe like wrap up my test harness while I'm, in some downtime? Or am I going to have to like take accountability for the fact that like I did nothing because I was just waiting on somebody else? And those like the consequences of those, again, actually the risk is often more weighed towards not taking agency in a lot of those smaller asks. And I think, again, I talked about learned helplessness a little bit, but in terms of that like mental mindset, like the culture that you're in and stuff, we don't want to feel not empowered. We don't want to be in a situation where we aren't sure where we can move. And if we do, then we've veered into that learned helplessness and victimization and, oh my gosh, this happened to me. And that leads to many, many worse outcomes.
I'm thinking about the context as well. Like, when does a person wait or watch or take action? Is there, I know that maybe it's different depending on like where they are in their in maybe their whether maybe like a new hire, for example, maybe they're not just gonna. I've seen people like they just sort of they day one and they start proposing all these ideas and wanted to change things, and then all of a sudden nobody wants wants to have anything to do with them.
Well, and that's what's interesting. I wonder, like, to break that paradigm, like you kind of have to do all three, right? You
Mhm,
have to wait, watch, and listen. You have to use them at varying balances
mhm,
throughout. And your active agency might look different depending on which phase of those that you're in. So I did have, I gave this talk to at a women in tech conference, and I had a young woman say, "Hey, like I'm early career. Like what would you say to somebody who like just started?" That's an easy answer for me. So my response is actually to say, "Hey, when I start at a new company, the very first thing I do, because it helps me understand, is I have conversations with people and I start sort of visually mapping out, here's sort of our processes, here's how people are working. And naturally that can become an artifact, right? So I'm taking agency because I'm going to put some time on your calendar to understand, right? That's an active agency. We don't, how many people would actually take that? or how many people would take that after going back and forth on Slack a few times? Oh, do you mind? Do you mind if I set something up on your calendar? No, send them immediately. Like, hey, I'm new. This is what I'm trying to do. They can decline it. Oh my gosh, right? Like they can decline it. That's fine. But what it's more likely to end up as is you building your relationship, showing your competency, and especially when, for me, having a visual of that process map in that context, people start saying, oh, well, this is how I would do it differently, or looking at something is better than talking in words. So yeah, that's the early career. Later career, that your agency is going to look different, quite different. It might be, hey, I really want to run this workshop, and it's going to take people out of their seats. So it's going to, understanding the cost of that, doing the benefits analysis, and saying, yeah, it's worth it. Or my first example at the start, right? So I'm mid-career. Somebody asks me to engage with HR. Do I have the skills? Does it benefit the company? I'm going to do it,
mhm.
right? So
So having developers engaged is always a challenge, and it dovetails, well, it is this subject, and trying to get them out and get them to participate, to take those first steps. They're computer programmers, right? So they're mostly men, young and old. And the best story I've found to convince them to get out there is to be the main character in that Martin Scorsese film, To the Faithfully Depart, the Departed. He's the big gangster. He's like, no, I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me. And it's a way to give them that confidence. Like, take this attitude. Like, look, I can advocate for this because I found sometimes it really is just a lack of confidence for them to start advocating for themselves, to start communicating with others. And that's sometimes hard for some people to overcome.
I think
Was that one analogy too far?
no, 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 no. I was going to think of a discrete example where, I think wikis in software development, they, especially now that we want to pair with AI, right? One of the benefits at the development team level is domain context and being able to like share that in a way that's not dependent so heavily maybe on the wikis anymore. But yeah, like, hey, updating, like, hey, when is the right time to document, wiki versus like letting the code speak for itself, and that sort of thing. And you get different opinions on it. And if we tie that back to agency and waiting, watching,
and making. I don't know. I just came up with it. I don't know. It's not. We're
yeah,
making
and
the framework as we go.
tying to leadership even. It's when do you become, when are you enabling? When are you becoming then a crutch? So like enabling a new behavior versus becoming a crutch, preventing that behavioral development from happening, and circling it back all on the why you're doing it. So, I was caught up there because obviously as a woman in tech, I know software industry is about 20% women, in computer science and development. And what's interesting is some of the, I think the acts of agency apply very, very similarly. And even probably more so to the females in the field, because there are a lot of, like assumptions or dismissals that would come in the face of agency. So like, hey, I did this, nobody's going to use it because they, like they dismiss me or something like that. And I think it's still worth it. You still keep trying, because again, the risk of not doing it is greater than the risk of doing it.
That aligns with my observations, is that in general, speaking up is not easy, especially if you're trying to advocate for ideas. And also, something that we didn't talk about, maybe we can spend a couple minutes on that, is like, how does the environment encourage or discourage advocating for your ideas? Because that's a big thing. There was probably, I'm sure if I searched for a cartoon or a comic about the culture, say, bring me all your ideas, and then everybody's giving ideas, and none of the ideas are being implemented, no ideas are being implemented, I'll probably find a lot of comics on that subject. But that really another dimension we ask, or there's tendency to ask people, okay, we are open to ideas, what kind of improvements that people have, can recommend, and then we don't really see any adoption of the ideas or improvements. So people tend to close down on and just keep it to themselves.
What's coming up for me is almost, I know we talked about detaching ourselves from the idea. I also want to make sure that we're that in this context, right, we're not, agency isn't just about like having an idea and needing to advocate for it. So it's also like it's being opportunistic to a certain degree, right? So a great example would be, I want to talk at a conference. Some people would say, oh, I need to like ask my manager if I should or if I can. And obviously again, this is operating within your constraints. There might be legal proprietary information, process you have to walk through. But then your active agency is navigating those and doing it. It's not necessarily asking permission, it's navigating the constraints. Or if you're in a situation where you psychological safety, or you feel like your ideas aren't heard or something like that. Again, this is accountability, right? So what are your trade-offs? Am I willing to stay in an environment where, I've proven with various experiments and data points that my ideas are either not going to be heard, or I don't have as many opportunities? Or am I going to start looking? That's really hard with the current job market. I'm not saying that's easy, but I never said agency would be easy. And the result of that search, right? You might say, hey, I'm really frustrated here. The result of your search might be, ooh, I'm willing to settle with this, right? There's some constraints here. I'm not happy, but in the global scheme of things, this is it for now. Another example would be volunteering. I think one of the things that I very much appreciated about some of my previous organizations, larger, they have volunteering opportunities, right? So I was able to, I'll go tutor some kids for 30 minutes before lunch, or I'll go run like a workshop really quickly. That's not something that I would ever expect somebody to ask permission to do. Again, prerequisite, I'm meeting expectations. I'm meeting my job expectations, and I'm a salaried employee. I'm going to go tutor some kids, right? The accountability is I get a lot of benefit out of that. I enjoy it. It's great. It's convenient. And to be clear, the company has sort of made it a priority by navigating it being there. So I did want to like sort of detach the idea of agency specifically from advocating for ideas, although that is a very like probably primary, especially at our base development level. Although again, if I go back to that example of like volunteering or like going, hey, if you're a salaried developer and you're getting your work, you're meeting your team's needs, it is also your responsibility to make sure you're working in a way that's sustainable for you. And if that means that there are things called ADHD naps. You like lay and you close your eyes, but you just let your brain run, right? They usually take about 25 minutes. If that's that's an act of agency, right? Like, I think, or taking walks. I used to take walking meetings, and it's in front of the windows of all of the leaders of technology. And and you think, oh my gosh, like, what are they going to think about me? But hey, this is really helpful for me. There's some risk there. But what it ended up with was whenever they did need to meet with me, they're like, Olivia, do you want to do a walking meeting? Yes, I do. So
yeah. I really like the definition, the accountability portion of it, because again, I have had similar experience. I worked at a company where my role was mostly like agile coach and helping, products and teams deliver. And there was a lot of constraints, let's say, or rigid approaches to adopting how we work. And I started thinking about, okay, I'm not able to really convince or influence or advocate. What are the skills that I need to learn in order to become better? So that's sort of like the accountability part, instead of saying, oh, I'm done with this, or why am I doing this? Why bother? But so I think that's what you're talking about. Having a growth mindset. What do I need to learn? What are the skills? Like if you were to say, okay, someone wants to learn agency or to have more agency, and I only mentioned some skills earlier, but what are some concrete steps or action or skills that they need to start to develop this skill, if you will?
We talked, so I mentioned specifically critical thinking as the three steps to taking agency. Aside, we have those prerequisites, right? You're building relationships, you're meeting your expectations, you're operating within the constraints of your work and life. The three steps, right, are critical thinking. And a lot of what that entailed in this discussion, and as we've talked about, is really like understanding risk from, an objective point of view, both if I do this and if I don't do that. So actually, really, you can translate into a more specific skill around risk analysis. I like to break risk down. Again, I came from GE, so I have by severity, occurrence, and detection, right? So what is the impact if things go wrong? Like, how bad would this be? Can I easily know when it's going to happen, and how often does it happen, right? So and that sort of squishy or translates depending on your context or what you're thinking about, but essentially delving into a little bit of like risk analysis, understanding ROI, right? Like what's the return on my investment either way. So I think that's a really good first step. We also talked about a little bit of awareness skills. So awareness both of like myself, awareness of ways of permission, developing via awareness around some of the emotional skills. So those are two concrete skills. The final steps for taking agency. One is essentially tell, don't ask. So it's kind of cheating. We hear it a lot, but you want to ask for permission. So you don't want to ask for permission. You'd rather ask for forgiveness. So informing people, be respectful about it, and be open to feedback where it makes sense. But I'll give the third step is communicating intentionally. So that's where I want to, tie that third skill development for. So we talked about sort of risk analysis, developing some awareness skills. I say originally I had to communicate effectively, but what I think is more important today is communicate intentionally. Don't ask for feedback if you're not open for it, or if it's too late for it, or right? Like if you're not going to do anything about it. Don't give more information up. So Jim, if you've been through a security audit before, when you're in audit scenarios, you want to give them enough information so that they're confident and able to assess. But if you give them too much information, again, the brain sees the detail and digs into it. It's very similar when we're in an organization. When you're going up, we talk about translucent communication. So I'm giving you enough details, but you don't need to know like my team's individual ways of working. If I'm communicating down, that's transparency because I have more power and therefore I owe you more information or to be as forthcoming as possible. So if I'm to associate a skill with that, it is understanding the context in your communication and adjusting as such. So those 3 steps, but 3 sort of sub skills to
Mm.
start.
I think influencing is a good one in relationship building and self-awareness. So a lot of these skills are something that requires some help or mentorship or coaching or someone peer feedback or something that can help because we don't really see the like, blind spots on our own.
I was kind of chomping at the bit because you really hit on something for me personally as you were talking through that. Um, I felt like my career was stuck. I felt like my options were limited. And an old friend of mine, an old manager of mine, was telling me that he coaches people, life coaches and job coaches. I was like, oh yeah, well, hey, let's do that. And sat with him for a few sessions, and I was very surprised when he came back and he says, well, you don't know how to advocate for yourself. It's like you can advocate for a lot of things, but not for you. And there's too much sitting back and waiting for this. And it's like, no, you've got to be much more proactive about you. And to do that, you have to know yourself and your limitations and strengths much better. And it really paid off. I mean, I was able to have conversations I would have been afraid of having a year earlier.
Mm.
Or maybe afraid's not the right word, but I wouldn't have done well the year before. So just a personal story that kind of applied directly to what you were saying.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of books I see about the topic of candid conversation, radical transparency. I have the same, like a lot of different titles, but sort of pointing to the same thing where having that conversation that is maybe hard or difficult, and it comes down to what Olivia was talking about, agency. How do you speak or advocate from values and be able to convey what you really want or need. And so appreciate this conversation. I mean, this opens up a lot of different ideas and thoughts, and I wish we could continue. Any final thoughts or anything that you want to share before we wrap up?
I appreciate both of you so much for the conversation and for your ideas too. I think where my idea of agency is evolving, right, is that advocacy and accountability piece. Like why take agency? That's really been reinforced in this conversation for me. So I appreciate you and your experiences. I just my tagline for this talk is, I mentioned, alluded to it a couple times here, but we're training, we're in an industry where, like, AI agency, we're training our agents to take their own agency. Take it for yourself first. So it's my
That's
plea.
that's a good way to end. And appreciate Jim's for staying and contributing in this conversation. Thank you, Olivia, for your willingness to adapt to
Yeah.
to more of a conversation than and you really appreciate your insights here. Jim, anything before we?
Thank you. This was much different than what I expected as well. I feel like we're all three in very different places, me probably more so than you two. So I think that took some patience on your side. So thanks a lot. It was enjoyable.
All right. Thank
I
you.
loved it all. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you.
Adios, guys.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
See ya.
See ya.